I'm glad there's a camera in the room, so that's fantastic. I work for de facto, and we specialize in mobility applications and enterprise content management systems and portals and all that good stuff. And we try to, whenever possible, use most current technologies to accomplish and get the job done. That's why we started looking at Xamarin. And the slides that you'll be seeing, I'm just showing you a couple, not trying to bore you here, taken from Craig, who took them from the Xamarin CTO. And there's only very little sales pitch in there, so they're quite nice. And this was initially presented at the Build conference. So as was already hinted to, mobile is huge. And at this point, we already see stats that the mobile internet usage already is bigger than desktop internet usage. And most companies are aware of this and are targeting the mobile platform to offer that to their users. And at the same token, people are getting more and more used to great user experiences. Like if you compare an iPhone app to like a plain old Windows app from like 5 years ago, there's worlds in between. People are used to snappy, responsive user interfaces, and that is most commonly done with native platforms. And one of the big players, Facebook, when they were switching to HTML5, switched the entire app over to HTML5, they had large problems with responsiveness, and people hated the app, and they actually had to go back to a native experience because they couldn't imitate that at that point in HTML5. And I, for myself, also noticed that, and I was actually looking at a competitor with half the feature set, but it was native. So I would have sacrificed the app for a much smaller app with less features just because it was faster. So I totally can see why people want to have the snappy and responsive UI. And at the current state we're in, there's a bunch of frameworks that you drop web content in, and it compiles or it renders apps or apps for different platforms, for the Play Store and for the App Store. However, they don't run natively. Therefore, there's still a disconnect between what people are used to for user experiences and what they can offer right now. And they don't really use the platforms to the fullest potential. So Xamarin's idea is that you want to eliminate having 3 different languages you code in. You want to have Objective-C, Java, and C# to cover the market. Instead, you want to avoid having 3 teams that are specialized for each of these platforms. And you would do that by using a common denominator. In this case, it would be the Xamarin framework, and it would allow you to just code in C#, code all your backend in C#, and share as much code as you can, and have one common IDE, integrated development environment, to get all your coding done. And Xamarin accomplishes this by building on top of the Mono framework or the Mono project. And it adds for all different platforms, so for iOS, Android, and Windows, it adds strongly typed mapping classes that allow you to interact with, let's say, core image for Apple as an example. And so the fact that it's strongly typed and it's C#, you get all the niceties in Visual Studio that you have, you have auto syntax completion, all that good stuff. And you only have to learn one language. So, C# developers are easier to hire, and talent's easier to find than iOS developers. You can do more with C# developers because iOS is only limited to the Apple infrastructure. And you also get, C# is one of the strongest languages out there right now. You have all the nice features like lambdas, async operations, all that cool stuff. So you can benefit from that as well. As for how it would look to program for Windows, iOS, and Android, basically the class that available to you is very much what Mono offers, the Mono project, and it's split in half here. You can see at the bottom in black, these are all these Mono classes which are built after their .NET counterparts, whereas the blue would be platform-specific classes which expose the capabilities of the device. So, phone, networking, storage, and so forth. If you now would, for instance, look at an iOS project, you would have the same base class at the bottom, but you would now have mapping classes that cover 100% of what Apple offers their developers for APIs. So you would have full access to all of that, but you're doing it in C# because you have these C# mapping classes. Then again, the same for Android. You would have the same idea right here, and again, the strongly typed classes. And so the way this is accomplished is by actually shipping the .NET runtime, or at least parts of it, to the device. I'm not sure if you can see this in the screenshot, but depending upon what your target is, you will compile to intermediate language, all of your code plus the .NET runtime, and would run it on the device directly. So it is very much a native app, and theoretically from the user's perspective, not to be distinguished from a native app built in Android Studio or in Xcode. And on an earlier slide, I was showing that the second, another big thing about Xamarin is that you share your code between your different platforms, and that is accomplished using portable class libraries. And so these portable class libraries, the idea behind it is that all the code sharing is of code that is not platform specific. So you would have, UI code for iOS would be vastly different than UI code for Android. But there's a lot of business logic that you might potentially have, data access, talking to services, all that kind of good stuff. You can put that in the back end. And because it's decoupled from the UI, you only have one code base here, and you might even be able to run it on, let's say, on the server side, because it is decoupled from all of the platform-specific classes, and is very much just dependent upon mono. And so these portable class libraries are targeted towards certain platforms. You can say, I only want to target iOS and Android, or also want to target Windows, and depending on what your targets are, you have more or less of the mono framework available to you. But it'll, even at design time, by you picking that and defining that profile, what you're targeting towards, it'll only let you use classes that are available, and they will run on all these platforms that you're targeting. So it couldn't be that you say you want to use link queries, but now you're deploying to Android and they don't work. No, if you have them available in Xamarin Studio to you in your portable class libraries, they'll work on all the devices you're targeting, which is pretty great. This is a marketing slide here, basically showing how much code reuse you can expect. So there's 3 apps and 3 columns, and it's showing in black the platform-specific code, and then it's showing in blue the reused code. So depending upon what your target is, there's a big or a small ratio, but overall you can see that there is at least 2/3 of code reuse, sometimes even 3/4. So it's pretty huge. So this is my last slide, and now I would like to show you some Xamarin Studio action here. About the Xamarin Studio, they offer it for Mac and Windows, and it basically comes with everything. Comes with mono directly built in, comes with the Android SDK, so it's all in one installer, which is nice because I've tried before to set up an Android development environment a few years back and I failed. It also has a Visual Studio add-in, so people love Visual Studio, so that's really good for that. And I'm going to switch over to demo mode here. Any quick questions while I'm switching over here?
A portion of the code is not shared. What happens there? Do you have to write native code?
Sorry, say that again?
In the portion of the code that's not shared,
Yes.
do you have to write native applications for that thing, or how does that work?
It would still be a native application, but you still write it in C#. The only reason why it can't be shared is because the classes that you're dealing with don't exist on other platforms. They wouldn't have anything to talk to. They're just mapping classes to the native interfaces of the individual platforms. So let me mirror my screen here. Excellent. Okay. So why don't we say we want to create a project, an app that has a button that you can click. It's a completely new idea. Why don't we build one of those apps where you just click a button and then something happens? And call it Xamarin App 4 because there's been 3 tries before to make sure this happens. So this is now an Android app, and as you can see, everything is in C#. And I'm just going to run this in the debugger to see that it works. So it's compiling this now. It's creating the Android APK file and it's deploying that to the debugger here. Oh, whoop. Synchronizing assemblies.
So how do you do your layouts? Like if I was doing an iOS app, I use the storyboard for some basic layout.
Mm-hmm.
Does this still branch over to Xcode then?
You will see that in a second. I'll totally show that. Good question. Yeah. I'm going to cancel that and redo it here. It's taking longer than expected. Deployment failed. That is excellent. Third time's a charm. Completed. There you go. And as it turns out, this app already comes with a button you can click. So this is a fantastic app right here. And it counts the clicks. So we're pretty much good. We can just ship this right now. Make $1 million. Or we also target iOS and make the really big bucks. So I'm going to add a new project in here. And I'm going to say it's a C# project, targeting iOS, iPhone, and it'll be a single view application. And to distinguish the different projects inside my solution, I'm going to give it an iOS extension here. Just really just a naming. I'm going to call this one .droid, just to keep them separate. And so I can just launch this now, and it'll just be an empty application here. And to have future parity, I'm gonna, ooh, this is nice and big, perfect. It's just an empty screen. I would like it to have the same features as the other app. So now to your question, in order to add controls to this, given that I'm on a Mac computer, if I double click a storyboard, it'll actually open in Xcode. If I do this on a Windows machine, it'll use its built-in storyboard editor. However, the Xcode one, as you might expect, is a better implementation. So it'll now come with Xcode and show my storyboard. And so the integration point is, if we were to, for instance, drop this control in here, and add this right here, and I click on this tuxedo guy. I don't know why they have a tuxedo there. And I create an action so I can actually react to this when this is being clicked. So now I save the storyboard and go back to Xamarin Studio. And at the top you'll see that it actually recognized that the file was changed outside through Xcode. And what it does is it's very similar to consuming like a WCF service where you have a designer file in the background that gives you access to certain classes. It's very similar to this, like the click me button didn't exist here before, it only existed because it was recognized from the storyboard. If I now were to implement this here, the sender in this case is the button itself. Instead of typing this out, I'm going to be lazy. So all I'm doing is I'm just taking the sender, which is UI button, I'm setting the title, and I'm just incrementing the click count. And let's run this. And also the emulator here for iOS simulator is also the built-in one coming with Xcode. Excellent. So now we have feature parity. But if we look at our code now, we can see that we have this right here. And then if we look at the Android app in main activity CS, we have this right here as well. So we're repeating ourselves. We don't want to definitely avoid that. That's where the portable class library come in, because we can just abstract that into shared code and reuse it for both platforms instead of repeating ourselves. So I'm going to create a portable library right here. Called PCL, portable class library. And in here, I'm just going to have a class that I call button labeled goodness. And this will just have a public static string, which is our button label format. And just to show that it's different from how it was rendering before, I'm going to change it just slightly. So now that I have this logic in our shared library, I just have to consume that by adding references to this from the iOS and the Droid projects. This will allow me then to use this class. So if you now say I want to add a reference to the Droid project, for instance, it will acknowledge that iOS cannot be referenced because it is incompatible. However, the PCL, given it's only a subset and works across all different platforms, is available. I'll do the same for the iOS app here in the reference. And now we just have to change our code to, instead of hard code this in here, to use our shared code. So I'm just going to add a using statement here. And then our class was called button label goodness. And the same will apply to iOS. To our controller file here. Again, I got to import the class here, which is PCL. And now in here, I can again just reference my constant value here. So make sure that my simulator is already off. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to start both apps right here. Wish me luck. Installing app on device. Excellent. I'm going to bring up the second app as well, iOS, put them side by side here. Okay, and now we're using the same code for both platforms here. Ta-da! This is the end of my demo.
So maybe since there were some questions through the presentation, we'll keep it short, and then we can have Matthias afterwards if you don't mind.
Yeah,
answering
for
some
sure.
questions.
Absolutely. Just approach me. No problem at all.
Sure. So we could keep it to maybe like 2 or 3 questions.
What are the costs associated with using this tool?
I believe it's $1,000 per seat per developer.
Per year?
It is likely per year. Yes. Yes.
In the demonstration, you just gave us what you implemented was fairly simple.
Of course.
I find when you're dealing with more complex apps and the nature of what you're trying to get more complicated, do you find that you do still run into issues that, or scenarios where you find behavior that's characteristic of one operating system and doesn't appear to be reflected in the other one? Just
You will. I'm just going to bring up the one slide again. I found these pie charts in the presentation quite revealing, because what you just mentioned is very much what I read into. Probably helps to plug this in. There you go. It very much corresponds to this slide here. If you look at, for instance, how in iCircuit, how much more platform-specific code exists in iOS than in Android, you can see that there's a lot of problems you have to work around. Therefore, your UI layer just becomes thicker. You can really only abstract what has no influence by the platform. Only that can be in a shared library. So depending on what you're trying to implement and how like in what ways the app is complex, if it's animation or if it's like you manipulating images or recording video, whatever it may be, you might have a thicker or smaller UI layer.
and then the component that doesn't intersect between 3 or 4 in this case, how do you handle that? Because you said there's only certain portions of code that can carry over.
Yes. So basically, going back to this slide, if you had, for instance, a library that only depends on the bottom half of these components here, which are just complete plain .NET classes, they will carry over. But if you use anything it's for instance, Apple's mail kit is really powerful. In previous versions of Xamarin, that was not available across the board. And now it is, but back in the day, you would have had to work with faulty mail implementations on, say, if you were to deploying it to Windows, because it wasn't available across the board. So you can, for instance, let's say you can use features that are really well implemented in the Android APIs to benefit your other platforms.
Yeah, I have one question.
Yes.
Can you troubleshoot this on device?
Sorry?
Can you troubleshoot using this Xamarin?
Can you troubleshoot it?
On device? Yeah, debug trace and
Yes, you can actually. Yes. Yeah. I earlier actually I ordered my free T-shirt, which you get when you debug the Xamarin store app, and it's basically you really just download it. If you're already an iOS developer, you hit F5 and it deploys to your phone. It's you can target it the same way you would do an Xcode up here. You would just say, instead of, let's say in iOS's case here, you can actually send it to the device right up here. If my phone was plugged in, it would give me the choice to deploy to the device directly. So yeah, very much so. And then you would have the debug screens pop up and the memory usage and all that. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Good. Okay.